She was trained at the esteemed Berklee College of Music. Handpicked by my very good friend, Terry Lynn Carrington, Dr. Terry Lynn Carrington, who put together Beyonce's entire female band, which was Matthew Knowles' idea because he couldn't get Beyonce to stop people. Guess you didn't know your daughter well enough because she just started all the girls.
What if one of the most outrageous celebrity rumors you've ever heard wasn't actually debunked, just buried? For years, people have whispered that Beyoncé isn't really Solange's sister, but her mother, a theory most people rolled their eyes at and moved on from. But now, that same rumor is creeping back into the spotlight, and this time it's tied to someone who wasn't just watching from the outside. We're talking about Richard Lawson, the ex-husband of Tina Knowles, a man who spent years inside one of the most private families in entertainment. And here's where it gets interesting. After their 2024 divorce, reports surfaced about a strict non-disclosure agreement that doesn't just suggest secrets, it practically confirms something worth hiding. Because when someone is legally required to stay silent, the real question becomes, what exactly are they being silenced about? The divorce itself wasn't just another quiet Hollywood split. It came with details that raised eyebrows. Instead of headlines focusing on money or assets, what stood out was the language buried in the settlement. A gag order, unusually firm and incredibly specific, reportedly prevents Richard from speaking about the Knowles family in almost any capacity. And not just general, keep it classy language either. This was described as a full-scale non-disparagement and confidentiality clause that extends into deeply personal territory. The kind of clause you don't include unless there's something very particular you want locked away. So naturally, it raises a question that no one can seem to shake. What could Richard Lawson possibly know after being married into that family that would require that level of silence? Not rumors, not speculation, knowledge. Because people don't get legally bound like that over nothing. And the more you sit with that, the more the curiosity starts to build. Now, this is where we need to talk about the rumor itself, the one that refuses to die no matter how many times it's dismissed. The claim is simple, but explosive, that Beyoncé is not Solange's older sister, but her biological mother. It sounds unbelievable on the surface, and to be clear, it has never been proven. But what's kept it alive all these years isn't just internet chatter. It's the way it keeps resurfacing, each time with new angles, new evidence. And now, a fresh layer of context involving someone who may have had direct access to the truth. And this isn't new either. People have been trying to piece this together for years, pulling at threads, comparing timelines, and asking questions that don't always have clean answers. So instead of jumping to conclusions, let's walk through what's actually been said and why some people think there might be more to this story than meets the eye. One of the earliest things that fueled this theory revolves around age, specifically inconsistencies that some people believe don't quite line up. There have been claims, never officially verified, that a birth certificate surfaced listing Beyoncé's birth year as 1974 instead of the widely accepted 1981. Now, there's no confirmed documentation publicly available to support that, so it sits firmly in rumor territory. But supporters of the theory point to moments in pop culture history that they say raise questions. One example that gets brought up often is her attendance at a Michael Jackson Victory Tour concert in 1984. Critics of the official timeline argue that she didn't appear to be a toddler at that event, suggesting she may have been older than stated. Of course, appearances can be misleading, and memory can be selective, but it's details like this that keep people talking. Not proof, just enough ambiguity to make some pause and look twice. Then there's the second layer of speculation, which comes from industry connections and personal anecdotes that don't quite fit neatly into the official narrative. One of the most talked about examples involves Gabrielle Union, who once mentioned in an interview that she and Beyoncé were friends as teenagers. On its own, that doesn't sound unusual until you compare their reported ages. Gabrielle was born in 1972, which would make her nearly a decade older than Beyoncé if the official timeline is correct. So when people hear teenage friends, it raises eyebrows. Are we talking about casual acquaintance or actual peers? Because in most situations, a college-aged woman and a preteen don't typically move in the same social circles. It doesn't prove anything, but it does add another layer of "that's interesting" to the conversation, and sometimes that's all it takes for a theory to gain traction. And then we get to what might be the most controversial piece of this entire puzzle: alleged insider claims. Over the years, a person who said they worked at Columbia Records came forward with a series of jaw-dropping statements about various celebrities. Now, to be fair, many of their claims were so extreme and unverified that they're widely dismissed outright. And that's important to acknowledge, because credibility matters here. But according to that same source, the one claim they insisted they could personally verify was the idea that Solange is actually Beyoncé's daughter. They alleged that they saw identification documents indicating a different birth year and pointed to what they described as a significant age gap that would make the theory biologically possible. Again, there's no public proof backing this up, and it sits firmly in the realm of allegation. But what makes it stick in people's minds is the way it's separated from the rest of the claims, as if even within a sea of rumors, this was the one detail they were unwilling to walk back. And that's really how this entire story operates, not on confirmed facts, but on layers of questions, coincidences, and just enough "what if" to keep it alive. Because when you combine long-standing rumors, strange timeline debates, industry anecdotes, and now a high-profile divorce with a tightly enforced silence clause, it creates something that feels less like a random conspiracy and more like a mystery people can't quite let go of. And just when you think you've heard every angle of the story, there's one piece that tends to make even skeptics pause for a second: the Girls' Time timeline mystery. Before Beyoncé became a global icon, she was part of a group called Girls' Time, and most people know the footage of them competing on Star Search, hosted by Ed McMahon. That performance is typically placed around 1993, and it's been used for years as a reference point in her early career timeline. But here's where some people start raising eyebrows. There are claims, again unverified, that the segment may have actually been filmed earlier than that. And if that were true, it would shift the entire timeline of how old the group members were at the time. Now, add another layer. One of the group members, Nikki Taylor, is said to have been born around 1975. So if the 1993 date is accurate, that would make her around 18, performing in what was presented as a children's group alongside a much younger Beyoncé. That alone doesn't prove anything, but it does create one of those hold on moments where the math doesn't immediately feel clean, and once people start questioning timelines, they tend to question everything connected to them. Then there's the angle that moves this from timeline confusion into something more personal, the idea that the rumor didn't just come from outsiders, but may have been whispered from within the family itself. One story that circulates often involves a cousin, sometimes referred to as Ong, who allegedly shared this claim during a heated moment at a family gathering. The way it's told, this wasn't some calculated expose. It was emotional, messy, and rooted in conflict. Supposedly, after feeling slighted or disrespected, this cousin revealed to others that Solange was actually Beyoncé's daughter. Now, whether that story is true or just another layer added over time, what keeps it alive is the motive behind it. People tend to ask, why would someone inside the family say something like that, even in anger, if there wasn't at least some version of the story floating around privately? It shifts the narrative from random internet gossip to something that, at least in theory, could have originated closer to the source. And that's where the rumor gains a different kind of weight, not because it's proven, but because of where it's claimed to have come from. From there, attention often turns to someone else who's been part of Beyoncé's early story, Lyndall Locke. Publicly, Lyndall has long been framed as the ex who lost out, the one who cheated, the one who couldn't hold on to someone destined for superstardom. That narrative has been repeated so often that it almost feels settled. But in conversations surrounding this theory, some people look at him differently. Not as the villain, but as a potential scapegoat. The idea is that if there were ever aspects of Beyoncé's early life that needed to be reshaped or protected, it would make sense to build a clean, controlled storyline around relationships, timing, and image. Again, there's no concrete evidence to support that, but it introduces a broader concept that comes up again and again in the entertainment industry: image building. The possibility that certain narratives are emphasized while others are quietly minimized. And when you start looking at it through that lens, people begin to question not just individuals, but the structure of the story itself. Which brings everything back to the present and to Richard Lawson. Because no matter how many old rumors, timelines, or anecdotes resurface, the reason this conversation feels different now is because of him. A man who wasn't just observing from the outside, but living within the family dynamic for years. And after his split from Tina Knowles, the legal boundaries placed around what he can and cannot say have only intensified the curiosity. Reports of a strict NDA, combined with unusually specific clauses, like restrictions around discussing even present or future grandchildren, have left people asking why those details needed to be protected so carefully. Some believe that if anything is being shared, it's not coming directly from Richard himself, but possibly from people in his orbit. Friends, acquaintances, or extended circles who may be speaking more freely. It's all speculation, but it feeds into the same central question that started this entire conversation. If there's nothing to hide, why enforce that level of silence? And at the end of the day, that's where this story leaves you. Not with answers, but with a choice. Are all these inconsistencies, anecdotes, and resurfaced claims just a collection of coincidences that the internet refuses to let go of? Or is there a possibility that something bigger has been carefully managed behind the scenes for years? No confirmations, no conclusions, just a story that keeps evolving depending on how closely you're willing to look.